Air Force Base is still on.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome back to the G.A.R. Hall. Oh my goodness. We shut down over the summer. We were at the Opera House in the fall. We were virtual during the winter. And now we're back. Hopefully it's time to stay. Just one announcement. You all might have heard our Memorial Day picnic is back after having to cancel it last year among everything else. It's Monday, May 31st at the Opera House, and that's just so we can fit more people. Hopefully it's going to be a beautiful day. If you aren't comfortable eating in large groups, we will have takeout options. If you aren't able to come but still want to support the fundraiser, feel free to make a donation. I will take however much money you want to give. There's no cap. But without further ado, I know it's been a while, but you might recognize today's speaker. Gary Blessman is the great-great-grandson of a soldier who served in Steele's army as the 126th Illinois Infantry. Gary is a member of our roundtable and has experience speaking on Civil War topics in Colorado, Texas, Illinois, Wisconsin, and of course, Minnesota, to such groups as the MENSA chapter, senior adults, Civil War roundtables, historical societies, and public and private schools. Without further ado, Gary Blessman.
And this can be as interactive as you want it to be. So if you got a question, and I'm going to be lazy and sit with you. I haven't wintered well. My feet are bothering me, so but I still get around. And I could not stand for an hour to do a presentation, so I just thought I'd go. This handsome man with a nice beard is General Steele. You say, have you seen a picture of him before? Well, they had an early color camera back then. Oh, this is a colorized photo. And it does bring out a lot of details. If you haven't seen any of the colorized Civil War photos, it does really help. That would probably help a little bit. There you go. And he had served in different parts of the country. And he got assigned to move to Arkansas, take over a newly developed army, the Army of Arkansas. And they all gathered in Helena, which many of the soldiers lovingly added another L to that town name, because it was such a lovely place to live on the Mississippi. This is a picture many years later of part of his staff. And you say, why part? Well, I know there's one person that's on the staff that wasn't on this, because he was over my ancestor in a skirmish in 1864. And he was also the last general in a battle in Colorado on the Plains Indian War. So I know this gentleman exists, but he's not in any of those individuals. Steele's the one sitting. As we talk about what this army is comprised of, you're going to see multiple regiments that were part of this. I have not researched all of them. I've got a book on the 61st Illinois. I wrote a book on the 106th. I wrote a book on the 126th. I know there's a book that came out, probably about a year ago now, on the 3rd of Minnesota. So there were many, many regiments that became a part of this Army of Arkansas. What was their major assignment? Take Arkansas back to the Union War Cause. Many of the regiments started up in this area and ended up down at Vicksburg earlier in that year. We all pretty much know what happened at Vicksburg. My ancestor was there. He was on the north side of town, protecting from General Johnston coming. Well, when Vicksburg fell, obviously all the guys were open for reassignment to another place. And many of them went back north, upriver. That probably was an interesting boat ride. To that lovely town of Helena, and also says West Helena. There was a battle in Helena, actually that same weekend, Vicksburg and Gettysburg. And the Union Army won. There were 4 different locations where the guns were emplaced. And the men gathered here for what was next. They rode steamers. My ancestor probably rode this. Their regimental record says that he was on the Baltic to go up north to Helena. And that's just one of many steamers that carried the men up and down the river. Well, one of the things I kind of promised to do, was to talk about the 3rd Minnesota and their involvement in this. And there's stuff online that you can find related to this, and this is a cut and paste. Hot morning in 1863, 400 men of the 3rd Minnesota disembarked from a steamboat at Helena. I imagine not only was it hot, it was humid, and those lovely blue uniforms probably absorbed a lot of sweat. So you can kind of get a little idea of where we're at in regards to Memphis. And Vicksburg to be down here. And their goal is going to be right here in Little Rock. Little Rock is where there was a Confederate army, where the power base was for the Confederates in the state of Arkansas. General Steele's assignment was remove them, move in, take over, and reestablish the state for the Union. Well, Helena, Mississippi River town, and every time you look at some of these pictures, you see something you hadn't seen before. As I was prepping yesterday, we're in Arkansas, and what does that say? Ice! You don't think about there being ice houses that far south, but there was. Probably harvested the ice off of the river. But these are some actual pictures of that area of the world during that era of time. You can see here. Okay, I didn't get that though. You can see some of the men right here. A little bit of a hill town. I've been to Helena. I don't know if any of you been to Helena. Okay, you have to make a point to go in some of it. As the summer days passed, the Union Army in Helena was hard hit by the ravages of typhoid, dysentery, and other diseases. My ancestor had chronic diarrhea and died from it, so I'm very aware of that. They sent him to Memphis for a while to dry him out, but he came back to Arkansas and was part of this venture. In this campaign, more men would be lost from illness than from enemy billets. The 3rd Minnesota nevertheless remained healthy. Other regiments, they were dying off, but apparently Colonel Andrews made sure they had adequate sanitation. I imagine that took a little bit of effort to make sure they had it. I've got a picture later. If I don't say something, I'll try to remember to say it. About the adequate sanitation. By August 11th, okay, they just left Vicksburg. July, arrived in Helena in late July, and are now ready to start marching. So their readiness for the campaign and the advance on Little Rock. 6,000 men marched out. And that may have been even a generous number because of how many were sick. Because it didn't take long before his army was reduced by over a third. Oh, and the rest of that sentence is Davidson, if you're curious. So they marched. This is one of the pictures I've seen quite often in my studies of Civil War of how many of the men marched. There were 4 abreast, following the roads. This one actually is from a picture that was taken north of Vicksburg. They were marching. 28th Wisconsin was there. 6th of August, they were transferred to the Army of Arkansas, left Helena on the 11th, and went to Little Rock. Marching by way of Clarendon, they reached, and there's at least 5 spellings of this town. DeValls, DeValls, DeVall. So, you know, there's multiple spellings. They reached that town on the 23rd. They marched on the 31st, reached Little Rock on the 10th, and just kept going and going like they already bettered. So, first, they march here, and their endpoint with today's highway system is Clarendon. Anybody been to Clarendon? If you haven't been to Helena, I doubt you've been to Clarendon. I have been, actually 3 times. And I've got another trip planned. Now, notice that the previous map had highway system of today. The roads then were different than they are now. In fact, the first road in Arkansas was known as the Military Road. In my 3rd book, I talk about that a little bit. I show the placement of some of the troops as they attacked the Confederates on that road. But I'm going to show you, you see this gray line coming out towards, now I'm at an angle, I can't read that. Looks like it says Planters. Then it goes over to Valley Grove, and then it goes to Lawrenceville. That's part of the road system at that time. And then they keep following this gray line up to the town of Clarendon. That's probably the way they marched because, duh, it's the military road. Why wouldn't they use that? It was the most developed road in that part of the state. So they probably went there. Went via that route. Here's a map of Clarendon itself. You'll notice right here it says camp. And up there, it's on the White River. And this little branch right here, C-A-C-A-T, Cache is how I pronounce it. I don't know if that's how the locals would pronounce it or not, but that's how I pronounce it. That river comes in play later, an event that happens in Clarendon in the summer of '64. Meeting no resistance, the Army reached Clarendon on August 17th. 6,000 troopers were not just cavalrymen, but their commander declared dragoons, taught by me to use the carbine, dismounted when necessary. So not only did they be nice on a horse, they'd be nice on the ground too. The sick list mushroomed to serious proportions. By the time the Army arrived at Clarendon, with several thousand men unfit for duty, the expedition was forced to halt. 40 men of the 3rd Minnesota were sick on August 20th. You think, 40 men, that's no big deal. They only had about 400 in the 3rd Minnesota at this point in time. So 10% of the people were sick in that regiment alone. Spent a week at Clarendon. It could not be transported. They had to be found where they could recover safely with only a small detail of healthy men as guards. DeValls Bluff, north of Clarendon on the White River, was chosen as a supply base. I have a picture of that coming up. and the hospital for several reasons. My ancestor ended up doing time in Memphis at their general hospital. One of the inventions before the war is the syringe. And during this time, the syringe was used to shoot opiates into soldiers to dry them up. Chances are he was shot full of opiates at the hospital in Memphis so that he could not have chronic diarrhea and get back to work till the week. This is Clarendon. This is my picture, I took it. In June, of 1864, somewhere right in this area, the rebels sunk a tin bottom. That is later, it's one of the activities of this army that happened in 64. We're in 63. Here's looking upriver the other direction. And, you know, somewhere up in here is where that other river came into the white. So we have to end up at DeValls Bluff after we got healthy enough to go back on the road. Now again, I've got the road system for today's highways. You know, that looks pretty easy, you know. My hunch, the road system pretty much followed the jigs and jags of the river. Just makes sense. So it, again, wasn't a one-day march, several days. General Davison's cavalry rode on ahead to reconnoiter the town of Brownsville. The 6 troops, well guarded by gunboats, sailed up the White River to DeValls Bluff. The 3rd Minnesota, along with the remainder of the army, arrived at the bluff on noon, August 24th, after a day and a half of marching. My hunch in August, it was pretty warm on that march. Day and a half on the road. Those old brogans probably got broke in and sweated in real good. The bluff was secured without incident, the ground prepared for defense, and a supply depot and a hospital was built. So immediately, we're going to take a week of vacation. Wrong. They're going to keep on working, preparing this little town to be a supply depot. So some of the buildings they built were these. So many of the enlisted men who that says contracted, doesn't it? It's contracted. That's the first time I've seen this slide and I saw that it was misspelled. The Clarendon shape, malaria, and other maladies were treated in these buildings at DeValls Bluff. Or this building was part of the medical complex. The structure probably housed only officers. It does look like an officer's quarters, doesn't it? DeValls Bluff in the Civil War. Of course, if you travel in the South, you're going to see many of these hysterical markers describing what happened locally and or overview of all the events that happened in the area. It was strategically important to both armies. It became a key Union supply depot after its fall in '63, as well as a haven for refugees, both freedmen and white. This is a pen and ink of DeValls Bluff on the river. I'll point out several things if you don't necessarily notice it. Anybody know what those are called on the hill? And no TP is wrong. It's a particular type of contracted Union tent. Oh, tent? Nope. It's after a general. That is the Sibley tent. General Sibley noticed that there wasn't a patent and a contract with the government on providing tents. Never wanted to let an opportunity pass. He got one and built these tents. You can see, obviously, we have pretty good little unit here that can fire a few shots with the Rebs. You can see supplies, you can see smokestacks from other boats. So this is a pretty important supply depot. Including, here's a picture of it real. There's a little museum down outside of DeValls Bluff that I found that has this picture in prominent display. My friend Floyd and I visited this lady for several minutes. And I took a picture of this. I've seen multiple pictures of it. You see wagon wheels. You see barrels. You see what look like wagon boxes, big baskets. That reflective is water. You can't really tell it, but those two blurps there in the water, those are two guys fishing. Obviously, we've got a couple of wagons there. You have 1, 2, 3 sets of smokestacks, because that's the water. What you're probably not noticing is right here. That is a rail car full of supplies. They built the tracks right up to the water to help the men take off from here onto there to take the Little Rock and the supply. Yes, sir.
Back up to that previous slide.
I can do that.
Looks like railroad trusses there.
Where are you looking at?
You see the.
Here?
Yes, and above that. It looks like reflections. Go to the up, down,
Okay.
there,
That's boat.
there.
There, though,
I was just curious, how many rails converged on that area?
one.
Just one.
Just one. In fact, we're coming to a few pictures on that. There was one railroad between DeValls Bluff and Little Rock in the whole state of Arkansas at this time. This is a picture I took of DeValls Bluff, the banks on that White River. There's a big bridge that goes across the river. And on the other side, there's a park, and I went down to the park and took these pictures. In fact, I've got a third one. But for the sake of time, I didn't bring it. But can you imagine all of these river craft landing and unloading supplies the war effort? Not only were these, this small little rowboats, we've got tin clads, we've got ironclads, steamers, transports, all of them, if they can get up the White River, they can get to this town because there's nothing to block it. Unless the water goes in, then they got issues. Well, they didn't stay in DeValls Bluff all the time. They moved on, and I have no idea what time it is. 1, 2, 3. One of the little towns they went to is a town called Brownsville. I think there's probably one of those in many areas. There was a little bit of a battle here, skirmish. Obviously, this is a commemorative sign. And notice, if you recall, I said there's many ways to spell that town. There it is, D-U-V-A-L. DeValls Bluff. Others are possessive, so they got that apostrophe S. So they ended up going from here down to here, where Brownsville is. Here's a different highway map of that same trip. Here's Clarendon, there's DeValls Bluff, and here's Brownsville, and there's their goal. They're getting closer. This is the first slide that mentions the railroad. The Little Rock and Memphis Railroad, even though at this time the track doesn't go to Memphis, its terminus is at DeValls Bluff and at Little Rock. And that's the next set of tracks to be laid is to Memphis. And here's one of those. I first visited this area in 2010. And quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff done yet to commemorate the war. Went back in 2015, and this is there. What's going on in 2015? Thank you. Exactly. Some government money arrived to help them touristize this area. So Memphis and Little Rock was the first railroad to run in Arkansas. It was chartered in '53. When the Civil War began, only 2 sections were complete. And this is one of the engines that ran on that, or at least an artist rendition of it. The others were the Brinkley, the St. Francis, the Little Rock, the Memphis, the General Steele, the General Reynolds, Appalookas, Adams, and General Carr. So there were many engines running this track, and there were many soldiers that got to ride and protect what was going on this. This slide is a map of what is about to happen in Little Rock. You say, that's awfully small. I've been debating this since I started doing the presentation, is how do I present something that you guys can see? It says a map of the approaches. Well, you see the Memphis and Little Rock. Down here it says from Terrytown. Up here's another route that says the Memphis something in Clarendon. I can't even read it. So I thought, well, let's try this. Maybe I'll get a different view of it with this. Kind of refocus my center of my map and expand it a little bit. Well, you still get some of the same difficulties. But you can see that there were several routes to come into Little Rock. And again, here, focus a little bit more. And part of the reason I'm doing some of this is obviously we've got natural swamps and stuff around this area. We have a lake right here near Little Rock. I haven't explored all of Little Rock, but I've been to some of the Civil War sites in Little Rock as part of that 2010 trip I took. September 7th, the 3rd Minnesota camped 10 miles from Little Rock. Here the expedition halted for 2 days while men of the 3rd tested Arkansas sweet potatoes and watermelons. I have got multiple diary entries where the men from Illinois had never had sweet potatoes and fell in love with the crop while they were in Arkansas. They dug a mess of sweet potatoes and had a fine meal. Or a company, their sergeant marched them out to a patch, gave the command to turn, quarter turn, and within 10 minutes had picked every sweet potato in that garden. This morning we waited to daylight. Did not start till about 8, so we had time to get some good pork. As our way was through a wooded section of the road winding, we moved slowly. We reached a large plantation. Nearly all of it was planted to corn, which was very large. Also a piece of sweet potatoes, of which I dug a few, which we had for supper. We camped about 1.5 miles from the Arkansas River, where it is expected we shall cross it. Today, for the first time, I saw pawpaws, persimmons, and 8 muscatine grapes. There's a town in Illinois called Pawpaw, and I thought, well, why wouldn't they have grown and had it there if they were from central or northern Illinois, which some of these records were? No, it's a fruit that looks like that. That is a pawpaw. That's not my friend's nickname with his grandkids, a pawpaw. So he had pawpaws, a persimmons. Anybody had one of those? I never have. I have no clue what they taste like. I see a hand. What's it like? I saw that. What's it taste like?
I can't remember.
Oh, okay. All right. Must have been good.
Doing that good.
Oh, okay.
Probably tastes like chicken.
That was a pretty foul comment. And then there's a picture of the type of grapes they had. My book that talks about this, I debated long and hard, do I want to pay for the color pictures, to pay for that in that book to show these? And I thought, no, our grandkids are going to Google everything and they'll see it online. All planted corn with some sweet potatoes. Coffee was worth $8 or $10 a pound in Little Rock. I'm not a coffee drinker, but when I go through an aisle at my grocery store, I see Dunkin' Donuts for $9 a pound. So that doesn't surprise me, but back then, that was a fair amount of money, probably. Of course, Bailey bought it for the troops. So. What?
Yeah.
Nothing. Oh. This I got right from a diary of one of the soldiers. I had reached out to one of the ancestors and he almost didn't give me permission to share any of his diary. And then he finally relented, saying, well, you are kind of advertising my ancestors' stuff. I am. Go ahead. This is a pen and ink of Little Rock, across the river. And if you go down there, there is a tourist brochure for the area where you can follow the different sites that they consider part of the Little Rock campaign. Keep getting some. This one right here, right there, Ashley's Mills, number 3 on the map. That is Ashley's Mills. I was actually there at the site. It's on the edge of a little small town. Remember we talked about good sanitation? Look at the water. Imagine you're in latter part of summer, you're hot, you're humid, you're thirsty, you want to make coffee, and you see a body of water. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Remember we talked about how they got sick? That's probably part of the reason. They were drinking that kind of water. There's a different part of that brochure. And here's my second map that I debated long and hard about sharing with you or not. This kind of shows the battle map, if you will. It's pretty small. I'll point out when I get to the third one, because it's a little larger. Here's the Revs. Here's the Federals. Bayou. Anyone here to pronounce that? I asked the local, so it's Porsche. I thought it was going to be Porsche, but it was Porsche. I have seen different versions of who was at the Union encampment on this side. As we were coming to Little Rock, General Steele said, you know what I think I'm going to do? I understand part of the rebel army's on the south side of Little Rock. I want to split my army and send some of them right here. And that's where they went. Some cannon, some cavalry, and some infantry. And I've seen different versions of who was there infantry-wise. One version my ancestor, one version he wasn't. But we do know that they had to build a pontoon bridge to get across the river. And here's a pen and ink of a pontoon being built. You may have seen this before. The place where this was built is on private property now. You can't get close to the river at that point. But it's somewhere between there and there. You know, use my long photo lens on my Surface laptop. I suspicion right here at this spot, because it was a lot narrower than it here. So the men could cross over. I know it's dark, I know it's hard to see, I did it, and that's why I highlighted it, so that you would know that the 3rd Regiment was at Little Rock. And many of you, if you've been to the state capitol, have seen the actual painting of the newspaper was shown. They supposedly, have a reason to challenge it, were the first in the town. One of the things, you look at these pictures, you find something new I've often seen. Notice all the men coming up and across the bridge that are back off on the horizon. So it wasn't just a real quick 2 steps and you're over. It was a good length bridge. One of Steele's first decisions was to select Andrews as a garrison commander. Colonel was notified of his appointment as he led his regiment into the city. The men of the 3rd, in all probability, learned that Steele had selected them for garrison duty because of their efficiency and good discipline. Hey, these are good men in the 3rd Minnesota. Let's put them here in town. And he wanted them to abstain from unnecessary irritating of the citizens. I can't imagine soldiers bothering any citizens, especially any ladies who are anti-union. Not that that ever happened in the war. Well, they ended up across the river. Some of the people camped on this side of the river, if you would. And this is what became the local train depot and shop and storage facility. And even several of the regiments were known to have camped in Huntersville. Obviously, this is a lot later, but it's the only picture I've been able to find of Huntersville. Battle before the fall of Little Rock. They arrived at Bayou Forge, 4 miles south of Little Rock. The enemy were discovered drawn up in a battle line, their right resting on the river, the left extending parallel to our front. After some slight skirmishing, the enemy, with a body of cavalry and a section of howitzers, attempted to flank us. Here, a severe engagement took place. Well, that's whoever wrote this article. From what I read, there may have been about a half-hour skirmish and then the rest skedaddled. And here, again, these are my pictures, are a picture of Bayou Forge. So you see it's not a very big body of water, but enough to cause a little nuisance for anybody wanting to get across. Here's the bridge going into Little Rock now. So picture, if you would, up to 6,000 men coming across the river on pontoons, or the bridge that was there. And the old State House during the Union occupation by the 3rd Minnesota, and if you'll notice, you have to look, I'll point it out. That probably is a picture of the 3rd Minnesota, since it says 30 men. They were there in headquarters town, if you would. Well, one of the things I promised was, and beyond, they've taken the capital, so they're in charge of that area. And now the duties change a little bit for all these soldiers. Yes, sir.
Commanding Southern General.
Price?
Price.
He took his men south, thinking it was better to retreat and live to fight another day. And they did. Well, when you go on beyond this, the 106th Illinois, which is actually a regiment that was from my birth town in Illinois, ended up in Benton, Arkansas. Whoop. Here's Little Rock, and they went down to Benton. I've been to Benton. Floyd and I have been to Benton. The John F. Shoppach House. This is a house where the 106th Infantry officers had their headquarters. It's still standing, or at least it was in 2015 when I was there. Notice the street sign. Right here, barely see that, I think it's the red roof. There's a gas station. I asked the clerk, why do they call that military road? Yeah, no clue. No clue whatsoever, and was born in that town. The military road went right by that house and went right toward. I'm hitting the clicker apparently twice because I'm hitting the pointer and then it advances a slide. So there's that. And I read something online that the 106th, the average soldier, camped in this grassy area under the water towers that are there now. So that's pretty cool. So when I was talking to that same clerk, I said, do you know about any soldiers living in this area? Soldiers? So she did not know their local history at all. They ended up in other towns as well. You notice it says deployment of federal pontoon bridges. So they had spots that they had to defend and assist with the continued effort to control the state. One of the sites they went to was Rockford, Arkansas. It's easy for me to remember that town because of Rockford shoes. Now, they're not made there, but. And here, you can kind of see that it goes down to the river. Floyd and I were standing down on the river so I could take this picture. I've got a bunch of pictures of that, but I just want to include one. And yes, you literally do go down to the river. General Steele marched his 8,500 man force, and Steele's out through a thinly populated wilderness, went down to the Washita River. My ancestor ended up going down this way for a while to Pine Bluff. Anybody been to Pine Bluff? Okay. This, they have a little museum there. This is a map that is posted on the wall of Pine Bluff during the Civil War. They got a phone call one day from somebody and said, yeah, we're going through grandma's things, and we saw this map, and we just about threw it out, and we thought, well, it says Pine Bluff, maybe we should call the museum there. Guess who has it now? The Museum in Pine Bluff. And I don't know if you can read it. It says courthouse, hospital. I know from my studies that all the area around here are swamps. Good, it's as swampy as can be. The men camped out in this area. Battle of Pine Bluff. This is in '63. They put cotton bales around the courthouse as a defense. My ancestor got sent back upriver in the 126th. They got to guard the mouth of the White River. Why would you guard the mouth of a river? To keep Confederate boats from coming upstream. So they were down there in this wild area. I tried to get as close to the river as I could when I was down there. You can't get there. You would have had to go in a boat just about to get close to the river. It was that bad, swampy. Mouth of the White River, upstream a little bit, is a town called St. Charles. And there's the river peeking through the trees. St. Charles is where there was a battle. Pretty much riverboats on the battle. The Confederates put a cannon shot through a boiler of one of the ships. Another famous thing as part of Steele's campaign was the Camden Expedition. This is one that I haven't spent a ton of time learning about. What I mainly know is it wasn't very successful. Steele took his men out, was going to connect with another army, and Price showed up. And they basically got chased back to Little Rock, or General Steele chose to go back to Little Rock. And here's another picture of it. And if you go searching, you'll see, Jenkins Ferry, and you can Google a lot of these battle sites and find out about it in Arkansas. Here's a hand drawing of it, kind of the same difference. Looks like there's just a whole lot of little towns that they went through to get there. Jenkins Ferry, 1864. And this is the person I've been talking about off and on the whole presentation. This is my ancestor, my great-great-grandfather on the maternal side, Edwin R. Groves. His name is at Vicksburg on one of the bronze plaques inside the Illinois Memorial. He served in the 126th Company D, was sick, contracted it in Vicksburg, got rid of it probably in Memphis, came back to Arkansas. After the war, he got home, married, had 6 kids. The youngest is who I come through. And within 10 years of the war, he's dead. And the death certificate says chronic diarrhea. I've seen the certificate. And I just hear my dad saying, boy, that was the, did you catch what I was about to say? And that is his tombstone. The one on the left is when I found it in 2010. Cousin and I from Decatur, Illinois. One on the right was June 6th, 2017. I took Windex with vinegar and a toothbrush and cleaned it so that you can actually read it. Yeah, it did come out really good. And it's that sandstone type of a stone. So I was warned, be careful or it'll crumble in your hands. Well, I haven't been back since I cleaned it. It came out pretty good.
I would make a comment about that parasite that you contracted. I know a few Vietnam veterans that got a parasite that never left them. And they're now 60.
Ah, okay.
That chronic bowel issue didn't go away, and it was from river water.
Yes, and I'm sure that's what was going on around Vicksburg, because they were drinking river water, or pond water, the water that was there.
Today, they can keep you going.
Yes, well,
Then you would have died from it.
he was a farmer, so I picture him being behind a pair of mules farming, every so often having to trot off to the local woods, so to speak, then come back out, and over time, you don't like that description? You don't like the trotting, right?
Exactly.
Did he write that book, 50 Yards to the Altos?
No, not to my knowledge, but I have heard that book, yes. I just know he was a farmer. He's buried near Nokomis, Illinois, in a little country cemetery. There used to be a church across the road from it that's no longer there. That actual cemetery's got about 40 stones in it, and if you blink, you will miss it, especially in the summertime with corn growing.
How old was he when he passed away? 34.
Yeah. My angle is hard to read. It looks like it says 34. Yeah. Not very old. And he was just one of many of our ancestors that caught something during the war. And the estimates that they say about how many died in the Civil War don't include these guys that caught something like this and were dead within years. He married, as I said, had 6 kids. The youngest son is the maternal side of my family. I met my maternal grandmother and great grandmother, but never anybody older than that. I've been to his, also been to his dad's headstone, which is in Hillsborough, Illinois. In fact, not for sure. There's a Civil War statue. He's about 2 car lengths from that statue. But he was in the Mexican War. So it was something that was part of the family apparently back then. And that, my folks, is my presentation today. I was given an hour, and I thought I'd leave at least 2 seconds for questions. At Billings, okay?
Yes, I think it says Helena.
I do have other presentations. In fact, we were talking earlier, I'll be doing one in Sauk City sometime this fall, and I've got one scheduled in Stillwater in January. And in fact, I'm working on a brand new one right now, so I'm quartermaster. That's kind of an interesting topic of mine anyway, so. Yes, sir.
Of the Confederate soldiers, were they primarily the Cherokee Indians that were allied with the Southerners, or were they white soldiers from the further east?
There were actually natives that served on both sides, but the actual Confederates primarily were white Southerners. I'll just ask, anybody know who the last general to surrender in the Confederate Army? Stand Weed, that's correct, the Native American. And is there any Confederate general that hasn't technically surrendered? There is one, that's right.
Nathan Bedford Forrest.
No, that's not the name I'm looking for anymore.
Who's the one went to Mexico?
That's the one I'm talking about.
It's not Curtis Smith.
Nope. Shelby. Excuse me. I've got 3 books. I brought some in case you're curious. This is book 1. Book 2 about the Logan Regiment. And then book 3 is more about, you're going to see a lot in here about General Shelby. He was the Confederate general that sunk a tin clad in Clarendon on 64. And then got ran off by the Union Army shortly thereafter. Well, it's been good to be with you. Oh, another question.
How much information have you been able to garner on
I haven't gone there for a lot. It's just what I find on the internet. There's stuff out there. In fact, I know the library in Green Bay has stuff that one of these days I'll go visit.
Did that group wind up in that Vicksburg area or Millerville or any of those towns?
I'm not familiar with Millerville. There's a town just outside of Vicksburg that I know several of the regiments went to, Mechanicsville, which we think of as another Civil War battle, but there was a little bird
Who was
crossroads.
who was the president of the South? Where did he-
Jefferson Davis.
Right.
Well,
Wasn't that Millerville? Or
that doesn't seem right to me.
He was in Mississippi.
He was in Mississippi, yeah. He was for a while, actually. If you give me 2 minutes, I gotta go to the bathroom and I'll come back and we can talk some more.